Welcome everyone to this inaugural webinar of our series devoted to promoting critical scholarship in pain research, or CASPR, as we've named our new community of practice. My name is Fiona Webster, and I'm a Canadian sociologist who's been working in the field of chronic pain since about 2014. My two most recently funded studies, COPE 1 and 2 and PEPPER, both use the approach of institutional ethnography to better understand the social organization of chronic pain, diagnosis, and treatment in the lives of people who live with both chronic pain and social and health inequities. So when I first reached out to many of you around the world, most of you I didn't know personally, but I'd read your work and admired it, and your responses were immediate. So when I described my own experience of working in clinical spaces and frequently feeling isolated, or my work being misunderstood or simply disregarded as interesting but not very useful. And that experience seemed to resonate with many of you. And I want to be very clear at the outset that my experiences have not been the result of poor treatment by individual doctors or other clinicians. In fact, I really had the honor of working with incredibly generous, talented, brilliant, and often critical clinician researchers over my career. But I think the barriers that I've faced and that some of you might face as well are residing in the entire organization of evidence within which we work. And here, of course, is what that organization of evidence looks like. I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with this hierarchy. And you'll notice that, of course, the systematic reviews of RCTs sit at the very top of the pyramid, and at the very bottom is background information and expert opinion. So qualitative research doesn't even show up as a legitimate form of scientific evidence or knowledge. And of course, not all critical scholarship is qualitative, but a lot of it is. So the struggle for legitimacy on research teams in relation to publishing, in relation to promotion, is really one of the defining features of many of our careers spent working as critical scholars within health spaces. And it certainly continues to impact many of us now within chronic pain specifically, which is arguably dominated by biomedical approaches. So the purpose of CASPR and the purpose of this webinar series is first and foremost to showcase the work of critical scholarship, really exciting work being done in this area, to put us in touch with each other so that for those of us who are feeling isolated, we have, the strength of community behind us, to help integrate critical scholarship into the broader field of chronic pain research. So when I go to chronic pain research conferences, it's really just a small and scattered handful of people colleagues that I find doing similar work to me. So it would be nice to sort of have more of a presence. To also help support and promote and showcase the work of new and emerging scholars. And there's so many new scholars now doing exciting critical scholarship in this area, and to create the ground for future collaborations. So in our work to date, we did a brief survey with those of you who responded to our call to be interested in a community of practice. We've established this webinar series, which I'm very excited about. We've created a website, Critical Pain Scholarship. So if you haven't already, please check it out. And I shouldn't say we created the website. Dr. Laura Connoy, who's going to be our first speaker today and who's worked closely with me on developing this community of practice, created our website. She's done a beautiful job. She also created a logo for us. In the future, we're planning a sort of meet and greet where, first of all, we'll do this virtually. And then we hope to sort of meet in person and talk about, how could we collaborate together? How can we better support and promote each other's work? So what is critical scholarship? So it's, of course, many things and has been defined in a myriad of ways, but for our purposes, and as we've posted on the website, it's not limited to any one disciplinary background. So it crosses disciplines. So a lot of the people doing critical scholarship in chronic pain now might also be nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, social workers, and many more disciplines that I'm not mentioning here. And there's also people doing work in the humanities. So when we talk about critical scholarship, we're talking about approaches that foster the use of critical theories and therefore the framing of questions in ways that challenge hegemonic understandings. It's about the recognition that knowledge is never neutral, but in fact has important political implications. Therefore, critical scholarship takes seriously issues of power and dominance, and it challenges the objectivist paradigm and the often unquestioned assumptions that dominate much of health research and chronic pain research specifically. And finally, and importantly, it's rooted in and committed to principles of praxis, change, inclusion, and resistance, rather than conformity and reproduction of the status quo. And why now? So I feel like this is a really timely moment historically for this group to come together. The social dimensions of chronic pain are increasingly being noted in the literature with the current emphasis, thankfully, on equity, diversity, inclusivity, and anti-colonialism that we're witnessing. However, despite this emphasis, the field itself is often lacking those with expertise in critical scholarship, who arguably bring forward approaches to issues of EDI that have been developed over decades, if not centuries. So we're being sometimes not included in these important conversations that are going on. I just want to say again, welcome. I should have noted at the beginning that we're taping these webinar series and they'll all be posted on our website. But thank you for being here today. Thank you for your interest, your support, for this growing community, for agreeing to speak either today or at future webinars, and for the courage in the work that I know that you're doing, the intellectual courage that it takes to undertake critical scholarship in the chronic pain world. And I'm hoping that together we can begin to think about how we can move our work from being at the margins of chronic pain research to being at the center. And in doing that, continue to put the experiences of people with situated experience and their families and at the center of research and care. So I think the time is ripe for us to play a more prominent role in this space, given again the increasing focus on equity and social justice that we see emerging. And I'm hopeful that together we can achieve our mutual interest in transformation, praxis, and change. So without further ado, I want to introduce our very first speaker of the series. This is Dr. Laura Connoy. She's a critical qualitative sociologist whose research interests center on the socio-political factors that shape the healthcare and healthcare experiences of mobile and marginalized populations. And we were really fortunate enough to recruit Laura to our research team, and she's currently a postdoc with the COPE2 study, where she contributes to research on the social dimensions of chronic pain. So Laura, welcome.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for this introduction. So as Fiona mentioned, I'm a critical sociologist and currently a postdoctoral associate on the COPE2 and PEPPER partnership studies, through which I've been introduced to the chronic pain field and also institutional ethnography, or IE. So today I'll be speaking about some work that I'm developing with Fiona on the potential contributions of critical sociology to the study of chronic pain, and the proposal of a critical sociology of chronic pain subfield. The idea for this work arises out of Fiona's program of research being COPE1 and COPE2, which utilizes IE to analyze the work that goes into living with chronic pain and marginalization. So recently, Anna Zajikova and colleagues asserted the need for a sociology of chronic pain, but their argument largely left out what we might classify as critical sociological approaches. Now, as many of you in this virtual room may know, sociology is a social science that focuses on society, social life and relations, institutions and behaviors. Indeed, the focus is quite expansive. Now, what makes sociological work critical, as Fiona has discussed, is when researchers aim to uncover and question relations of power underlying social injustice and inequity within society. As defined by Schofield, critical sociological investigation involves systematic identification and analysis of the specific social dynamics involved in the production of opportunities for and barriers to equity. Critical sociology has made important contributions to our understanding of the social conditions, sociopolitical contexts, and health-related beliefs of a society. For example, critical sociologists have played a key role in identifying social constructions of the illness experience and sense-making, the power of medical knowledge, the sociopolitical factors that inform and justify restrictions to healthcare and healthcare coverage, the social construction of diagnosis, issues of uncertainty, the presence of ruling relations within everyday and every night health-related experiences, and social movements. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, nor are these strands of research mutually exclusive. Based on this work, we can see that critical sociology has much to potentially offer chronic pain scholarship, especially as the broader field continues to turn to issues of equity and social justice. And so despite this potential, the field of chronic pain has been slow to draw on critical sociological insights or theories that offer ways to address social issues of inequity. Given this, how can we imagine or understand what a critical sociology of chronic pain is? So we understand it essentially as those approaches, such as IE, that evaluate the workings and impacts, including bodily impacts, of oppressive social systems and structures on the lives of those living with chronic pain. While a critical sociology of chronic pain has yet to fully take shape as a clearly defined subfield, let alone a general sociology of chronic pain, its development would assist in identifying social patterns of inequity that underlie chronic pain experiences and show how these evolve, are regulated, and negotiated over time. In doing this, researchers would make clear how the foundations of daily life are co-constitutive of powerful and stratifying social systems, structures, relations, and organizations, and how everyday experiences of chronic pain are intersectional and grounded in one's standpoint. Now, to be sure, we are increasingly aware of how the experiences of many people living with chronic pain are informed by oppressive social systems and structures that sustain inequity. For example, in my own area of research, I'm interested in exploring the experiences of residents of Canada who are not classified as citizens or permanent residents and who have little to no affordable access to chronic pain care treatment. And this is actually something that Dr. Moosa-Mitha will be speaking about today. Fiona Webster and her team, alongside other critical scholars, such as sociologist and CASPR member Joanna Kempner, have been exploring how gender and gender stereotypes significantly shape expressions of chronic pain, its presentation and management, and how it's imagined and encountered in clinical spaces. We also know from sociologist and CASPR member Jane Prima that Black people, specifically Black women, living with chronic pain continue to face racialized stereotypes in clinical spaces, and this includes those stemming from the racist underpinnings of conceptualizations of pain, and how this can lead to additional work to have their pain recognized among other, often violent experiences. And these are just a few of the many key examples of inequity as it pertains to chronic pain. And so to give a better sense of what critical sociology has to offer chronic pain research, I'm going to discuss some key themes in the literature, and these are medicalization, neoliberalization, and stigma. So as defined by Conrad, medicalization refers to a process by which non-medical problems become defined and treated as medical problems, usually in terms of illnesses or disorders. Fiona Webster has pointed out that the problem with medicalization is that it encourages medical solutions for non-medical social problems, while rendering the effects of complex social problems as individual ones. When we apply the concept of medicalization to chronic pain, as noted in some of the work of sociologist Gillian Bendelow, we begin to see how the social contexts within which people living with chronic pain reside are overlooked. In other words, pain rather than poverty becomes the focus, or racialized identity or race rather than racism. So these non-medical factors that influence health outcomes are constructed as a problem treatable through medical interventions, thereby directing attention away from systemic and structural inequities. And the second theme is neoliberalization. So while it's tricky pinning down a definition, a generally agreed upon understanding of neoliberalization refers to social, economic, political, and cultural relations and theories that emphasize economic growth, free market solutions, and the decline of state responsibility in favor of self-responsibilization. Critical sociologists have played an important role in highlighting how neoliberal values and reforms have come to shape ideas of health and the healthcare system. Specifically, health is a matter of personal responsibility and self-management, which veils over the effects of historical and contemporary conditions. For those who do not and or cannot fit neoliberal ideals, such as people who live with poverty, they are seen as having a personal fault or failure and face increasing deprivation and marginalization. And it's important to pay attention to how neoliberal responsibilization has been incorporated into chronic pain frameworks, which places focus on people living with chronic pain to modify their actions and attitudes while ignoring the reality of complex lives. So people living with chronic pain in constrained circumstances may in turn be imagined as failing to take responsibility for their chronic pain, as it overlooks the work that they are already performing in their everyday lives. Finally, stigma is a foundational sociological concept, with Goffman's conceptualization largely dominating the chronic pain space. So here, stigma is defined as a discrediting relational attribute rooted in understandings of social identities. It can be understood as a specific characteristics or marks that discount, discredit, and devalue claims, identity, and rights. While this is an important conceptual contribution, stigma is also vulnerable to critique. So for example, it's been argued that Goffman's approach to stigma is not informed by a concern over the plight of racialized groups. Critical sociologists are attuned to the particular types of stigma faced by people living with chronic pain and who use drugs. As argued by sociologist and CASPR member Lise Dacieux and her colleagues, people living with chronic pain and who use drugs often face a double stigmatization, contributing to increased marginalization and the production of a, and I quote, particularly discrediting social identity, which can increase stigma during conversations about opioids, in addition to the work of people through stigma management. So critical sociology offers important challenges to dominant biomedical and clinical conceptualizations of chronic pain. It does this by questioning the taken for granted nature of medical knowledge, exploring and making visible how chronic pain experiences are socially constructed, and as a result, complicating how and in what ways chronic pain can and should be conceived as intersectional, contextual, and complex. Heeding the warning of Eccleston and colleagues that, and I quote, the social scientific study of pain has become fixed within an agenda of orthodox medical and psychological paradigms, we believe critical sociology offers an important way forward that can and does provide tools to prevent it from becoming fixed and to make visible the social dimensions of chronic pain. In actively working towards a critical sociology of chronic pain subfield, sociologists will be able to create an identifiable, conceptual, and theoretical space to learn about and magnify the social forces and structures of power that create and sustain the inequities associated with chronic pain and the ways to transcend them. And this is a list of some of the references that have been included in today's presentation in case you're interested in following up. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was a wonderful first contribution to this webinar series. I'm now very pleased to introduce Cassandra Macgregor, who's going to give us a critical perspective on acceptance of chronic pain, meta-ethnography findings and future directions. Cass works as a physiotherapist in NHS Lancashire Chronic Pain Service, providing input to pain care with the interdisciplinary team and across different health services. She's currently undertaking PhD studentship jointly funded by NHS Lancashire and Glasgow Caledonian University. Her PhD research takes a critical perspective on acceptance of chronic pain and also covers health inequalities and intersectionality. Cass is also interested in developing pain research epistemology or ways of knowing to center lived experience and inequities. Welcome, Cass.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, so as Fiona said, this research idea came from my clinical practice, where I work as a physiotherapist in the field of chronic pain. And I was lucky to get PhD studentship funding from NHS Lanarkshire, which boundaries on Glasgow in Scotland, and Glasgow Caledonian University, and also the support of my supervisors, Chris, Emmanuel and David, and my co-researchers, Claire and Ruth, for this meta-ethnography. So, in my clinical practice, acceptance of chronic pain is important to navigating the change in approaches directly targeting pain relief, for example, prescribing medications towards focusing on long-term management goals, which can include improved quality of life, fitness, function, for example, paid or unpaid work, mood adaptation. So it's about helping people to sort of drop the unhelpful struggle with long-term pain. And obviously that's a balance. So I was wondering, in approaching the PhD, could this guide or inform decision-making around management choices for chronic pain? And it's a tricky initial consideration, as acceptance is often attributed to the patient. However, prescribing is a behaviour of the clinician within the care system. And in setting out on the PhD, I'd noticed the sort of tension in the literature between the idea of a rationally derived construct and qualitative studies on the lived experience of chronic pain and acceptance, which described a broader lived experience within a social world, and the contested language and meaning was apparent. So I was already starting to think, what about the role of culture, systems, inequalities in the conceptualization of acceptance of chronic pain? So I knew there was enough primary studies to make a secondary synthesis possible, and we selected meta-ethnography, which is towards the interpretive end of the spectrum in qualitative synthesis methods. And this is described in 7 phases, becoming increasingly more interpretive as we go on. So for our meta-ethnography, chronic pain is the primary condition. So this is not pain as a symptom of a secondary condition such as HIV or cancer. And the studies had to include an aim to research acceptance of chronic pain. So following the systematic search and purposive sampling, we included 10 studies, and in meta-ethnography you can divide these into different groupings. So after some different considerations, we selected 3 groupings at the translation phase, which were based on the perspective within the study on acceptance of chronic pain. So there was 2 groupings that generally had a more accepting perspective, or almost a retrospective on the journey. And this included 2 community studies from Canada. And then there was 3 studies where participants had completed a pain management programme in Ireland and the UK. And these were sections of published studies. And then there was a slightly larger mixed perspectives grouping, which had more of a variety of populations. So this included first-generation immigrant communities in Australia, and this was additional data that was provided by the author. There was older community-dwelling adults in New Zealand. There's people attending healthcare in the Netherlands, and we had that data translated for our study. People going into a pain management programme in Sweden, and then people who had stopped or dropped out of going to a pain management programme in London. So we incorporated the lines of argument, which is what you develop in the meta-ethnography synthesis, into a conceptual framework, which is titled An Ecosystem of Accepting Life with Chronic Pain. And this is represented by a rose bush with roses and thorns, such as the nature of accepting life with chronic pain. So in the centre, there's the different ways that acceptance is conceptualised within the studies as a fluctuating state. And this includes it being conceptualized as resignation, as failure, an automatic state, a desirable state which is worked towards, and an equivocal state. Around that, there's the fluid and continuous journey, which is ongoing, fluctuating, evolving, occurs on multiple levels, and is likened to learning, growth, and grieving. And there's a tension between acceptance as a state and accepting as a process. The turning point, mental health, and iterative steps were all features of this journey, and these features were immediately relevant to clinical practice. Language and meaning, which is over on the top left corner, the studies often started with a section on this, where they discuss difficulty on the terminology around the underpinning concepts to do with acceptance and what the painful condition meant. The roots here represent the caring, supportive, and coherent system, which included healthcare and workplace environments and different forms of practical and emotional support. Moving to the limits of individualism, in this conceptualization, chronic pain is a long-term health condition, so it comes with condition management work and the required capacity, social support, financial resources to carry this out. So the person requires to redefine their narrative, to negotiate the pain diagnosis, and all of these things can be impacted by health inequalities. So particularly because we took the stance of this concept being socially constructed, we were interested in the study contexts, and there's some evidence from available demographics of potential socioeconomic differences between the groupings. So the two studies with the lowest education levels in the populations were in the mixed perspectives grouping, where acceptance was more likely to be conceptualized as begrudged, resigned, or as a failure. And the two studies with the highest education levels were both in the more accepting grouping. And just continuing on the right-hand side of the rosebush, identity was frequently tied to the idea of being active, capable, and productive. Hence, the challenge to identity in a capitalist, ableist society as a line of argument here. So acceptance of chronic pain and its consequences may be viewed as personal failure, surrender, or giving in if one identifies as active and capable, an active, capable person, and cannot accept the limits that pain brings. And accepting required an element of reconciliation. So there's an illustrative quote here. My identity was very much wrapped up in what I can accomplish, what I can be counted on for, and that's something I'm still learning to let go of. So our findings show some evidence for the impact of health inequalities, which fit with the literature, but this is an area for further consideration, particularly in a neoliberal culture leading to interventions placing sole focus on the individual, which may limit the process of accepting life with chronic pain. So while it's necessary to provide personalised healthcare, these interventions may be more effective in the long term if accompanied by systemic changes around the person in pain. So we reconceptualised accepting life with chronic pain beyond an individual factor to a fluid and continuous journey, interdependent with our social, cultural, and political worlds. So I wonder, could the ecosystem be used to develop understanding and delivery of pain care in a way that recognises fluidity and interconnectedness? And it certainly gives us a lot to think about with language and meaning, and cause to avoid promoting overstated objectivity of the concepts, and perhaps to reconsider how objectivity can be applied. So for what's hopefully the final stage of my final study of my PhD, I'm engaging interested parties in the application of the findings and determining priorities for future research. So I'm interested in how do people relate or not to the findings, and how can they be used to improve the journey, including care. So with people in Lanarkshire who live with chronic pain and adversely experience intersectional health inequalities, we're trying to develop as inclusive as possible eligibility criteria, and we began developing this back in November with recruiters and advisors. So it's been about sort of developing an understanding of what we're trying to do, developing boundaries in the eligibility criteria, for example, around about mental health, so that the study can be safe and ethical, running through potential participants and what barriers often come up. For example, cost of travel, anxiety levels, language, reading ability, and then trying to practically plan for elements of the study, including budget for interpreters, travel being accommodated in advance, focus groups, and also including participant diaries to gather data, and trying to conduct a home interview for demographics and consent. And also moving to healthcare staff, obviously include myself in that. I do my PhD part-time. So very interested in moving forwards, how we can use our findings and how they can be applied in clinical practice. And I think perhaps a very topical question for today that I'll leave you with is, what is our role in the political? So just to say thanks again to my supervisors and co-researchers, and do feel free to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Cass, for that wonderful presentation. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm eager to see what you find as you move forward with it. So our next and final speaker today, before we open up the floor for questions and answers, is Mehmoona Moosa-Mitha. She's an associate professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And she's also a longtime activist scholar working in the area of children's citizenship rights and decolonial theories of pain and trauma in the lives of refugee newcomer populations.
How do I do a slideshow? Okay, got it.
Okay.
Oh, hi, everyone. I have a hard time with technology, so
Play from start.
Can you see this? I'm assuming you can. Okay, so I am going to talk about the meaning of pain.
Mehmoona, I'm so sorry. You want to, under slideshow, you want to hit play from start.
Play from start. Oh, yeah. Okay,
yes.
Thank you, Fiona.
Go. You're welcome.
Wonderful. Okay, so meaning of pain in newcomer refugee populations. My interest in the talk today is to offer a decolonial framework by which to understand it. It is what I'm talking about today is the result of an empirical study, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it and then move on to some of the themes we found, but basically spend most of my time talking about how our research team is understanding the meanings of pain based on the narratives of refugee newcomer populations in using a decolonial lens. So physical pain is generally understood as raw sensory experience, but what we were trying to do was to look at the narratives of socially marginalized groups on their experiences of pain, but also their encounters with healthcare professionals. And we were trying to analyze the data using decolonial theory. There were 4 groups that we talked to, but I'm actually going to just talk to the analysis that we undertook with refugee newcomer populations. We talked to LGBTQ populations, we talked to the very poor, we talked to indigenous communities, and then we also talked to refugee newcomers. And these were focus groups that we held with each of the groups. The group I'm speaking to were, it's a limitation of the data, were largely from Middle Eastern, North African, Arabic speaking peoples. They were between 35 and 60 years of age. And we talked to 14 people in all. 3 themes emerged from participant narratives. Body is unknowledgeable, and this was about how people's narratives, refugee newcomers, going to see healthcare providers and their narratives of pain being disbelieved for many reasons. to the point where some of them, because of the disbelief by healthcare professionals, their very lives were at stake. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in the next slide. The second theme that emerged was the treatment of the patients as without culture. And when culture was accepted as important in understanding how they were narrating their pain, it was only understood in a very narrow sense, as let's get an interpreter to translate what this person is saying. So a very narrow definition of culture. And body as irresponsive, largely health professionals treated participants as passive. They were the authority. They were going to tell them what was going on, and the participants, their own reactions and understandings and knowledge were irrelevant to the process. So the first theme about body is unknowledgeable is encapsulated here, where the participant is saying that she had a headache. She went to see the health practitioner, who said it's nothing, take some Tylenol. This went on for 2 years. And then she goes to an emergency and says to the health professional, I feel something in my brain. I feel like the right side of my brain, there is something in there. And the health practitioner once again disbelieves her and says that doesn't actually tell her she's faking it, but the impression she gets was, he thinks I'm faking it. She insists. She says she won't leave the office of the practitioner, and he takes a CT scan, and it's a huge tumor on the right-hand side of the brain, as she was saying. The piece about the body as not cultured was this quote, which was this piece about, okay, well, when practitioners were taking culture into account, they were doing it by getting an interpreter, and an interpreter doesn't always understand medical language. So the interpreter, this woman said, had a huge litany of issues that she was facing, was in chronic pain. And she said, life is not easy for me. It's better that I die. And the interpreter interprets it as she wants to kill herself. And before she knows it, this woman is put in a psychiatric ward, and her children are taken away from her for 4 years. So these were the kind of stories we heard about how culture was interpreted in understanding narratives of pain. And the last one is the piece about the body is irresponsive. Here's a quote which says that this woman doesn't know English, and because she doesn't know English well, she meets up with so many barriers to accessing good healthcare. And she says, what I need to do is to learn English. And it's a huge task. She's in her 60s and she's wanting to learn English because it's the only form of control she has in accessing healthcare. And we found so many examples of very dynamic responses to whatever the health practitioners were saying about pain and to addressing pain. This is the main focus of my talk. So what we did with those 3 themes was we applied a decolonial lens and came up with 3 concepts that are central and core to decolonial theory and are core to our understanding of the meaning of pain in refugee newcomer populations' lives. The first one is dispensability. Dispensability is a core concept in decolonial theory. Fanon talks about how visceral the colonization is, how bodily it impacts you, and how your body, your embodied experiences, and you as a person are considered surplus. And an example that Achille Mbembe gives about this is the way slavery happened through colonization. People were considered as commodities and were seen as surplus. and used as part of the neoliberal liberal economy, capitalist economy. In present day circumstances, and refugee newcomers know this so well, is the arrival of refugees to borders that are more and more impermeable, and these people are seen as surplus, and so they are dying trying to cross the sea or trying to cross the borders that are basically not allowing them in at the very risk of their lives. We see the same perpetuation of colonial practices in the narratives of the participants. So when the participants say that they are not being believed, or their embodied knowledge is not being considered, then they are being treated in a very dehumanizing way. And a lot of participants talk to that. They said, we want to be understood, we want to be treated as humans. So this separation between the body that has to be fixed, that other speakers today talked about, and the personhood, the social context within which the participant comes and is seen as irrelevant, is a reiteration of this idea that you are dispensable, your life doesn't really matter. We won't really do a CT scan on your brain to see what's going on. We'll just ask you to take more Tylenols over a 2-year period. The second concept, alienation, is again a core concept in decolonial theory, and it is about being created and socially constructed through the white gaze. And of course, this has been talked about in decolonial theories from 200 years, because it is the very essence of what it means to be colonized. It means to be told who you are, what your subjectivity is, and to be found lacking. And you are told who you are, but the alienation comes when you don't feel it corresponds to your interior understanding of who you are. And this again was in the narratives of participants. It is in the nature of pain that it is an alienating experience. You go to, you feel pain, you don't understand it, you don't understand where it's coming from. You go to the doctor looks at it, and it becomes the authoritative presence who tells you, here's what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. You may be feeling it on the left side of your body, but really it's the right side of your body, an organ there that's causing the pain. So it is in itself an alienating experience. But when you're not believed, and where your social identity is not taken into account, and the only thing that matters is the objectifying gaze of this health practitioner, then the alienation is again reinforced and reiterated, and is a familiar experience for newcomer refugee populations, because it's a reiteration of colonial practices. And the last concept, agency, it is about the colonial theorists insist that the colonized subject is still a subject, is not a victim of colonization, but a survivor of colonization. Therefore, the dynamic encounter between the colonized and the colonial doesn't have a predetermined outcome. Because to understand that encounter, one has to also understand that the agency of the one being colonized is going to inform and in many ways define the outcomes of that encounter. And we took this as an important concept through what we were looking at in terms of the narratives of the participants, because Mathur et al. In their pain research makes the point that the dynamic nature of the encounter between the health practitioner and the patients is often not taken into account and discussed in studies and research findings. And we found that it was actually crucial that there were so many strategies that refugee newcomers used to explain how they were finding alternative ways to address the pain, or resistant ways by which to say we are subjects and not the objects simply of your authoritative gaze. So in summary, taking a decolonial perspective of pain offers the possibility of acknowledging pain as both subjective and objective, as it's about thoughts, emotions, as well as biological fact, and it results from both political and physical trauma. And unless we take a decolonial perspective, in the case of marginalized populations, they don't just have to be refugee newcomers, unless we take that as part and central to their social context, we may well be overlooking what is an important way, a lens by which meanings of pain are mediated in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mehmoona, for that wonderful talk. And all three of the talks, I think, represent sort of the range of methodologies, career stages, and foci that can be taken in this space. So I'm going to now ask all the speakers to put their videos back on, and we'll open up question and answer. We only have 10 minutes, but hopefully we will be able to get to people's questions.
Yeah, so if people could just type in their questions in the Q&A. Right now, we have a statement. I believe this is directed to Cass, not a question, but your research sounds so thoughtful and looking forward to hearing more about it. Thanks.
So while we're waiting to see if audience members have questions, let me start with one for each of you. So I can start with you, Laura. Where do you see your research going, just in a few sentences, in the future?
Sure. So, so I'm in the process now of developing different studies right now, one focusing on the experiences of chronic pain among refugee claimant women. And then the other one looking at issues of gender and trauma when it comes to chronic pain.
Yeah, that's great. And trauma is such sort of an important theme and conceptual lens to sort of use in the area of chronic pain. Cass, how about yourself?
At the moment, I am. We are trying to write up the meta-ethnography for publication. Well, for submission for publication. It's quite lengthy, so you know it's obviously taking a bit of work. But the main thing I suppose that I'm focused on is trying to develop the protocol for the next study for for the engagement of people living in Lanarkshire to get their perspectives, and then develop sort of future research priorities. So I think I'm just getting an idea now of maybe why a lot of research is quite exclusionary, just the time and the effort. And I'm so grateful to have the studentship that I do, because it pays me at my clinical rate. So I'm not looking for another job, I'm getting paid to do this work, which is hard work, and takes time. So I'm actually getting paid a wage to do it, which I think is quite important.
It's very important. And Laura, I noticed we have a couple of questions. Did you want to read those? And then Mehmoona, I'll ask you the same question. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question from Nicole. It's actually a very good question. Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful presentations. This has been so inspiring. What is your advice for researchers who don't have a background in critical scholarship, but are looking to grow in this area?
That is a good question. Why don't I take a shot at answering that question? So one thing that I would recommend is aligning yourself with other critical scholars. So, and seeking out their mentorship. Obviously, reading broadly in the area of critical scholarship is important. So those would be the two main things that spring to my mind as being important. As you're beginning to become interested in the area of critical scholarship. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that on the panel. No. Okay.
I'm possibly closest to that being a PhD student. I don't know. Yeah, I would really just echo that. And yeah, so I think there's been a lot of different people. I think I'm developing from a village to a small township of people that I use for support. But for example, like Jackie Olimbe, who I think might be on the webinar today, has been really really supportive and kind of opened my mind to quite a lot of different literature. But that was really just connecting in sort of with shared interests, and then just meeting up, and then, you know, we were writing about a claim that was made in a paper, and then they wouldn't take our letter, and then we were writing an editorial. So it just kind of, I guess it was allowing my interest to be led, and then to kind of follow that, and just to kind of, like you were saying, courage at the start, just to kind of have the courage, because then we were up against, you know, all the sort of systems and stuff. But that's why I'm really pleased to see this network set up. But, you know, I'm really grateful for that, because I think that this could help to support that kind of work.
Thanks, Cass. Was there other questions, Laura?
Yes, and lastly, we have what knowledge translation techniques do you find most useful for your work?
Knowledge translation, which is a practice, a discourse, an ideology, of course. So, so that's such a big question that I'm not sure that we have enough time to answer it. I'm not trying to skirt it. But, you know, there's passive dissemination, which is when we publish articles or speak at conferences, and that's often not very useful. And I think a lot of us are often doing participatory research, where we define ourselves not as researchers, but as activists, as Mehmoona does. So the knowledge translation can take into account forms of translation, such as advocacy. And again, I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to try and answer this very big question.
I just wanted to say it's a really tough one, particularly when you don't want to be passive in the way you translate the knowledge. I mean, I always make sure that whatever analysis we get, we go back to the people from whom we had who are the source of the analysis. And so we ask our participants if it makes sense. And I'm always astonished by their response and how nuanced their feedback is, and how it nuances the data even further. So I just would say it's a dynamic translation process.
You know, it brings to mind, Laura and I have talked about the possibility of doing like a short webinar series on actually some of these issues, like politics of publication, and sort of how to move your work into advocacy, or, you know, taking up sort of this idea of the political aspects of our work. So maybe that's something that as a community we can sort of think about bringing together, especially for people who are sort of more sort of, I hate the word junior, who are newer in their careers, or just starting out. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that question.
I think that segues actually really nicely into the next question of, is there space to hold for methodology workshops, i.e., for example, grant writing in relation to chronic pain? So I think that could be another idea to add into there.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, lots of questions coming in, and there's 2 minutes left. So let me see here. So I'm just kind of going in row here. So there's often a focus on the individual change in managing chronic pain because shifting systems is so challenging. How would you suggest we take initial steps, especially as researchers or clinicians, to support these needed shifts? I'm not sure if I should keep going through as like thought pieces.
I'm seeing a lot of questions coming now. And you're right, we're under 2 minutes at this point. So I think we might have to, unfortunately, pause on the questions and begin the wrap-up process. So to remind everyone that the next webinar is, I think, is it April 23rd, Laura, again? It will be posted on the website. So watch for news of that. Please circulate and retweet, and sort of let's keep growing this community. All the webinar presentations today will be posted on the website. And I'm wondering if maybe we can open up a space on the website, Laura, where we can start having discussions with each other and start addressing some of these questions that are coming up, because we might not be able to get through all of them as we couldn't today on today's webinar.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank our speakers so much. This has been, I think, a wonderful way to kick off this webinar series. You're all doing amazing work. And thank you for sharing it with us today. Thank you to everyone in the audience who attended today. And I will look forward to seeing all of you again in April. Thank you. Bye-bye.